So if we flash back around a decade ago, 3 legendary, revolutionary hypercars were released and shook the world. The Ferrari, the Porsche 918, and the McLaren P1. These are cars that even if they were released today, they would seriously shake up the automotive performance world. But for the 2010s, these were the craziest cars ever. Now, with the dawn of a new decade, a lot has obviously changed since then. Emission regulations are coming down hard on auto manufacturers, and it's becoming more and more difficult to make supercars with truly amazing engines. However, emission regulations don't apply to vehicles that can't be driven on the road. And if we take a look, these new wave of track-only hypercars could very well be considered the holy trinity of the 2020s. So let's do a deep dive on what I think will be the next iteration of the holy trinity and figure out what exactly makes these cars so goddamn special. Now, when Bugatti announced they were going to be making a hyper-track focused vehicle called the Bolide, people, myself included, were cautiously excited. If you take a look back in their recent history, while yes, they kind of have a record of making the world's fastest cars, these Veyrons and Chirons aren't known for being the fastest track cars. Don't get me wrong, they are fast, just not as fast compared to the competition. Hell, even to be fair, Bugatti hasn't raced in any racing series since the early and mid-90s, so to be cautious about a new car like that is honestly perfectly reasonable. Then, they dropped the rendering for this beast, and footage leaked of the Bolide testing at the Paul Ricard circuit in France, and anybody who thought this wouldn't be an absolutely lethal track day threat was proven wrong pretty quickly. This car had striking design elements with incredibly sharp and extremely aggressive aerodynamics, and don't think that it was just for show, as every square inch of this car was sculpted to ensure it would get the quickest possible lap times at any circuit, anywhere, anytime. That wasn't all though, as this car would also be getting the beating heart in the form of the 8-liter W16 out of the Chiron. However, it wasn't just copy-pasted. The engineers at Bugatti increased the size of the blades in the turbochargers and the positioning of the turbochargers so that they wouldn't get as hot when the engine got up to temperature. Just a quick little crash course. The reason, in theory, why you want your turbos to stay cooler is because the cooler the air going through the turbos, the denser the air, and the denser the air, the more power the car can make. So the specs on this still shouldn't be that crazy, right? I mean, yeah, they did some tweaks to it, but it's not anything wild. Well, wrong, actually. This is the craziest car of the century, and I do not say that lightly. I can't cover every single thing as there's just way too much, but I can give you a crash course. The horsepower is increased to over 1800 horsepower on 110 octane racing gas. Combine that with the fact that the curb weight is at almost feather-light 2,700 pounds, that gives it a power to weight ratio of roughly 1.5 pounds per horsepower, which if you know anything almost sounds too insane to be true. Now obviously this car utilizes a full carbon fiber monocoque and an almost entirely carbon fiber body as well. The previously mentioned quad turbocharged 16 gets paired to the same basic all-wheel drive system found in the Bugatti road cars like the Chiron, and it also gets a 7-speed dual clutch transmission. Aside from all of that, it's kind of difficult to say as they only just announced the production car, so there isn't much to work off with this car for now. What we do know in addition to all of that insane stuff I just mentioned is that this car has an estimated Nürburgring Nordschleife time of 5 minutes and 23 seconds, which is just 4 seconds slower than the all-time lap record set by the Porsche 919 Evo. But the insanity still isn't over, as according to Bugatti, this car will have a top speed well past 300 miles an hour and be able to accelerate from a standstill to 300 miles per hour back to a standstill in roughly 34 seconds, which is just beyond revolutionary, especially when you take into account the extreme aero this car utilizes, which creates massive amounts of drag at high speeds. It's just insane. For the second insane car in the next-gen Holy Trinity, we hop across the English Channel to Britain to check out an insane vehicle being offered by McLaren. Now, I made a video previously critiquing the fact that McLaren loves to reuse the same parts like engines and more on their road cars. However, this next car is about as different can be. This is the McLaren Solus GT, the latest offering in the McLaren Ultimate series, and in my opinion, it actually has the coolest backstory behind it. So I'm assuming most of you know about the video game Gran Turismo. For those of you that don't, it's a racing game exclusive to PlayStation consoles, and in my opinion, is far superior to Forza Motorsports. Anyways though, the developers for Gran Turismo got in contact with all of the world's top auto manufacturers and asked them to develop the craziest performance cars they possibly could. And since it was a video game, real world rules didn't apply, and we got some crazy examples like the SRT Tomahawk and more. However, McLaren's offering is probably the second coolest behind the Tomahawk in my opinion. The term is used a lot, but the way the front end slopes down from the rear and the aggressive design lines from the rear wings, it really does look like you're looking head on at a fighter jet. And the designers at McLaren thought so too. In fact, everyone at McLaren loved the idea of this car so much, they decided that they were going to somehow figure out a way to turn a car that was not made for reality into, well, reality, and somehow some way, they actually have done it. And the spec sheet on this thing is just, it looks like something only someone crazy enough to be in a full-time institute could possibly come up with. Unlike every other McLaren, it's going to use a V10, a naturally aspirated 5.2-liter Judd V10. And if you know anything about Judd, you know that means this is going to be an absolute behemoth on the track. The engine will allegedly be able to rev past 10,000 RPM as well. It doesn't utilize any chains or belts on any part of the engine either, which is really weird and honestly mind-boggling if you think about it. It's going to be good for around 829 horsepower, which when paired with the curb weight of just 2,200 pounds, it helps get this up to 60 in just 2.5 seconds. It uses a 7-speed sequential transmission essentially ripped out of a Le Mans prototype car, which uses an aluminum magnesium case with straight cut gears and a carbon fiber clutch. All of that sounds just beyond amazing on so many levels. It also utilizes a carbon fiber monocoque and carbon fiber crash structures as well, both hallmarks of F1 cars, and it uses ground effects, which creates a vacuum underneath the car, helping it stick to the ground. That, paired with the massive rear wing, front splitter, and overall hyper-aggressive aerodynamic styling, helped this car produce up to 2,600 pounds of downforce, more than the car weighs, meaning in theory, you could drive this car upside down. The most striking part of the car though is that door, or canopy, or whatever it's called, as it has this weird canopy that moves up and forward, and that's how you get in. Now, this may not be a popular opinion, but I think that kind of proves that this thing is meant to sit in garages. I get it, there's probably some sort of safety equipment that helps make sure that you can get out in the event of a rollover or something, but compared to standard doors, that's really unsafe, especially for a car that's meant to be driven on a track, and especially when this is already as crazy as it is. However, you do get some cool freebies with the car, stuff like an FIA homologated race suit and a seat fit just for you as well. For the final car on this list, we really don't have to travel far. In fact, it's also in the UK as well. So when most people think Aston Martin, words like dog shit interior and horrid build quality come to mind immediately. So when they announced they'd be making a super serious track-focused hypercar, everyone, myself included, kind of rolled their eyes. And then they revealed the concept car and everyone went ballistic. See, in its base form, the Aston Martin Valkyrie is already one of the craziest hypercars the world has ever seen. Designed by the most successful Formula 1 car designer of all time, Adrian Newey, and built in collaboration with one of the most successful F1 teams of the 21st century, Red Bull Racing, the Valkyrie was almost always going to be crazy. So when Aston Martin announced there was going to be a run of an even crazier track-only performance variant of the Valkyrie called the AMR Pro, everyone was beyond ready to see what it was capable of. And believe me, this thing did not disappoint. It's getting the 6.5-liter naturally aspirated V12 courtesy of Cosworth. Yeah, that Cosworth. That was good for up to 1,300 horsepower, making it the most powerful naturally aspirated engine ever fit to a production car. But that's not the only record this engine has broken. It's also the highest revving engine ever fit to a production car with a red line north of 10,500 RPM. It utilizes smaller wheels than its road-going counterpart, and not only is that to help save weight, but it's also to ensure that the tires, which are Michelins that have been ripped right off an LMP1 car, can squeeze on there. But we still aren't done with the crazy parts this car has, as it utilizes carbon-carbon brakes, the exact same brakes found on an F1 car. What are carbon-carbon brakes? Well, a lot of high-end performance cars like McLaren's, Porsches, and etc. use carbon ceramic brakes. That's what these are, just instead they are also reinforced with carbon fiber as well. You know something is ultra high performance when it's using carbon fiber in places you didn't even think was possible. The exhaust also has been modified so that there is little to nothing standing in between the block and the exhaust tips to help ensure that the engine creates as much power as possible, which also means that when the NA V12 is screaming at 10,500 RPM, the whole world is gonna know. All of that paired with the ultra aggressive aerodynamics this car has been designed with means that this car, when driven on the limit, can and will pull up to 3.5 Gs in certain corners and up to 4 Gs when braking, which just sounds insane. It also utilizes a larger rear wing and a fin to help guide air over the rear wing, again similar to the fins found on LMP1 cars. It's going to have a 0 to 60 from a standstill of about 2.5 seconds and an absolutely insane top speed of around 250 miles an hour. All of this doesn't come cheap though, as each car has been sold for $4 million a piece. Kind of outrageous considering you can't even drive it on the road.